You were going to do a piece on Jim Harbaugh, right?
No, I was going to do a piece. The angle of the piece was, does Michigan have enough quote-unquote talent as the recruiting people define it for 5-star guys to win a national title? I started working on that, talking to the Todd Blackledges, Joel Klatt, Jim Nagy, people who've really studied the roster of this team.
Okay, and that was your angle, premise, if you will, going in.
Then I also asked some of the Michigan players and got with Jim Harbaugh. And
this was at the Big Ten.
This was in Indianapolis, and spent a bunch of time around the Michigan guys. I still did the piece has all of the other stuff in there, but Jim Harbaugh gave it a different headline because he was like, I bet we break their record. And they was Georgia, and they had 15 players drafted, as you know, a year and a half ago. He thinks this team will have 20 players drafted. And it's a huge number, obviously. And he kind of started rattling off the list, and some of which, Nagy, who does, the Senior Bowl and runs it, was like, yeah, we have 7 Michigan, basically senior offensive linemen who we think are definitely on our radar. Mm-hmm. And now whether all those guys get drafted or 4 of them get drafted, even if 4 of them get drafted and the rest of the guys Jim was talking about, that still breaks the record, handily. So
what was the question that elicited that answer? Do you remember? Because he also said that they can beat Georgia this year.
That was a separate. So somebody else.
A separate soundbite.
So that came up like 2 months ago. There was somebody I was talking to who's connected at Michigan and told me about the beat Georgia period.
Yes, that's right.
We'd reported all about this beat Ohio period, how it changed everything when Jim Harbaugh implemented the beat Ohio State period.
But they call it beat Ohio.
Yeah, they do. I know. I had people going, they don't play Ohio. I was like, yeah, you don't understand what they do.
It's a derogatory term.
Yeah. So that got a lot of traction, that little beat Georgia period. And then, so when I saw some of these guys, Mike Sanderstill was the first guy, the defensive back that I had talked to, kind of was like, okay, this is a lot. I was like, what is it? And he said, well, it's a lot of heavy personnel. It's 12 and 13 personnel.
This is the beat Georgia period.
This is the beat Georgia period. And then when I talked to Harbaugh about it, he said, they all use the same old Ric Flair line: to be the best, you got to beat the best. And to beat the man, you got to beat the man. To be the man, you got to beat the man. And so into that, he said, I said, how is it different from the beat Ohio period? He goes, well, this is 11 on 11, not 9 on 7. And I think it's just another way to frame and focus them, which is very different from what the people inside the program had told me a few years ago, where Jim had come back from the NFL and it was almost like a nameless, faceless opponent. Now he's putting faces and devil horns pretty much on these opponents.
Well,
now.
By the way, I love it, because I'll be honest with you, when I first arrived on the campus at the University of Michigan in 1986, when Jim Harbaugh was the quarterback and Jumbo Elliott was his protector, and everybody in my dorm and all the Michigan people I had met who had been Michigan Wolverine fans since they were, as Warren Sapp would say, knee-high to a jackrabbit. And I had just surfed in from New York City, started rooting for Michigan. And everybody's talking about the Rose Bowl. And we got to get to the Rose Bowl. And I thought to myself, why? I thought championships are the reason why you're doing this. Nobody, when I got to campus, honestly, it was all just beat Ohio, win the Rose Bowl. That's it. I'm like, what about the national championship? And they would kind of like blink at me like, what are you talking about? It's about the Rose Bowl. And so I kind of dig somebody who's from that era of beat Ohio, win the Rose Bowl, is now talking about the bigger prize. That's what it is in the 21st century. If you're going to go for 4- and 5-star recruits, you got to have that attitude, right? Even though Georgia folk like Brockman across the way and others are like, get out of here. Do you recall the Orange Bowl? Do you recall not making it to avenge that Orange Bowl loss last year because TCU beat you? Like, that's the response. And I kind of dig that, yeah, let's have a beat Georgia period. So what? Well,
let's I think the players he has, Sanderstill is this great leader. I mean, it's funny because you look at him; he's one of the few 3-stars who are starting for them.
Yes,
and he's by all
he's a convert.
Well, but he's a smaller guy, right? And he's not very big. He's a hell of a player, and he's a really good leader. But he talked, the way I ended the story we did on The Athletic this week was him talking about we can't take anything for granted, and he kind of walked you through why, and no disrespect to TCU, but they did not prepare the way probably they know they needed to prepare, and that can't happen again. And so I think there's two things that are different that they have to hope work out. Well, one is one of those 5-star guys that they do have, J.J. McCarthy, didn't play when they played Georgia. He wasn't the starter. Cade McNamara obviously was.
Yeah.
JJ is really, really gifted. And we saw that certainly against Ohio State when the backfield, there was almost no Blake Corum. He played, but just,
for a brief bit,
2
cup
plays.
of coffee.
Yeah, and even though Donovan Edwards had 2 great runs, he was also playing injured in the game as well, or playing hurt. And McCarthy made big plays. And so, Jake Butt, who obviously played for Michigan but has called a couple of their games, was
Big
like,
Ten Network too. Yeah.
We gotta see him, in games, even though they know they're going to win, give him a chance to. So it's not just in case of break glass, we need you to be Superman. We need to see more of that because it's in him. And I think what I kind of focused in a little bit on this story was the 4 teams that have won national titles in the last dozen years with similar ranked talent, which is not like the way Georgia and Alabama and even Ohio State have recruited. That one were a dozen years ago, Auburn with Cam Newton, Florida State when they had Jameis, Clemson with Trevor Lawrence, and then Joe Burrow with LSU. They had talent, but not like the talent we're talking about these other schools. Well, what they do have in common is all 4 of those quarterbacks were elite college quarterbacks. 2 of them, Joe Burrow and Cam Newton, are the greatest college quarterbacks I've ever seen. Like, in terms of what they did. Cam Newton was Superman. That team was not very talented by the recruiting rank, by any metrics. It was Cam and Nick Fairley. And by the way, Nick Fairley was a 3-star coming out of high school. If J.J. McCarthy plays like all the people who are evaluating him think he has that talent, I do think they can win a national title because they have really good leadership. They have obviously a terrific offensive line. They have dynamic running backs. I think, they've had some of these other guys blossom. Chris Jenkins, whose dad, former NFL star, he was a 3-star guy. He was 240 pounds when he went to Michigan. He's 302. And Jim Harbaugh told me, he goes, I think he'll be a top 10 pick. He is the kind of guy that Georgia and Alabama are playing with. That's now, right. They don't have 8 of him, but they do have a few.
like Georgia and Alabama have.
Yeah. But,
okay.
And it helps them that this is the year where the 3 most talented teams, quote unquote,
are starting
new quarterbacks, and 2 of them were the top of the draft, and the 3rd guy, they're going to probably build a statue of him in Athens.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.